host here at Ohio State every summer. We'll be offering the MedVet Acarology course in 2014. And so it's an intensive workshop, 1 week on mites and another week on ticks. So if you're interested, just Google Acarology Summer Program and you can see the details and the cost for the course, etc. So do appreciate you all checking in with us on this session on ticks. The emphasis is going to be really on hard ticks or exotic ticks, and 3 ticks that we find most important in this part of the country, and probably spend more of our time talking about Lyme disease. But really, I think the key thing here is that with integrated pest management, first you have to be able to identify the pest. So toward the end, we'll have a little session on basic tick ID, and we can give you some resources so you can get into this into more detail. And the work that we've been doing here at Ohio State especially on the emergence of Lyme disease in Ohio, is a collaboration with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Ohio Department of Health, and Ohio Department of Agriculture. And recently the Air Force has joined us in this project as well. So you see on the screen there 2 pictures. One is of a female black-legged tick or deer tick on a tick drag collected last year in February. And this is to remind me to tell you that this tick is active pretty much 12 months out of the year, even on cold days like it is here in Columbus this morning. But it also is a tick that lives in wooded areas. It is very sensitive to desiccation, so you usually find it in wooded areas where it also finds a host that it feeds upon. So these are 2 things that are really different compared to the ticks that we normally see in Ohio, the American dog tick especially, that's found in grassy areas or ecotone areas. So a little background on ticks first, just like a baseball card, kind of the basic facts about ticks. First of all, they only feed on blood. They're slow feeders. That is, the hard ticks are slow feeders. Soft ticks feed quickly, and it may take days or even weeks to complete the blood meal, depending on the tick and the stage it's feeding. These ticks can live for a long time, months or even years without taking a blood meal. And what this means is that some ticks can be not only vectors of disease, but also reservoirs. Another key ingredient in terms of epidemiology is whether or not the disease is transmitted from the engorged female tick to her offspring. And this would be transovarial transmission. And for some diseases, this does occur. For rickettsial disease, for example, but for Borrelia or Lyme disease, this does not appear to be the case. Ticks have a really high reproductive potential, thousands of eggs compared to maybe hundreds of eggs for other blood-feeding arthropods. Another key element is how many kinds of hosts that the tick feeds upon. Some are universal feeders and feed upon almost anything that comes along, and some are very host-specific. And of course, this is a key as you're trying to sort out what tick you might be dealing with. So this is just kind of a quick overview on tick biology. We can go to the next slide there, Denise. In terms of the life cycle, there are about 850 kinds of ticks in the world. More of the species are what are called hard ticks or exotic ticks. And within the hard ticks, most of those are what are called 3-host species. And what this means is that each developmental stage, larva, nymph, and adult, feeds on a separate host. And that's indicated in the figure there with the boxes with host 1, host 2, and host 3. And it may take anywhere from 1 to 3 years or even longer to complete a life cycle, depending on the tick species and where it is geographically. So in general, what happens, the eggs hatch, and then the larvae then seek a rather small host. And there's a picture of a white-footed mouse there as an example. It takes about 3 days for these larvae to feed, and then they drop off, molt, add a pair of legs, become a nymphal stage. It becomes hungry, and then seeks usually another small host, feeding for about the same time as a larva, about 3 days. Feeds up, drops off, molts then to either an adult male or female. And then these usually seek a medium to large size host, where The female tick may feed for anywhere from 6 to 14 days, and males, once they get on a host, may stay on that host throughout the entire tick season. And in general, mating occurs on the host, although for the genus Ixodes, mating may occur either off the host or on the host. Then the female, once she becomes engorged, she drops off, finds a suitable habitat, and she may hold on to her eggs for a considerable period of time, or she may lay them fairly soon after she drops off. And so this is the basic three-host life cycle that we see for Ixodes, Dermacentor, and Amblyomma, the three kinds of ticks that we'll spend most of our time talking about here. So next slide. This is just kind of a list of ticks that we find in Ohio and surrounding states, about a dozen or so in Ohio, and as you go further south and east, we begin to see a richer variety of ticks. The ones in red are the ones that we're focusing on today, and the ones in general that are serious pests and also that transmit different diseases. Ixodes scapularis there at the top, the blacklegged or deer tick, and then the Amblyomma americanum, the Lone Star tick, and Dermacentor variabilis, American dog tick are the three key species that we're going to talk about today. But you can also see Ixodes cookii, the woodchuck tick, fairly common here in Ohio, and really east of the Rocky Mountains. And also Dermacentor albopictus showing up on deer this time of year. A lot of hunters observe these ticks on the deer that they shot recently here in Ohio. Then the brown dog tick, common throughout the United States. Up here where it gets pretty cold in the winter, it doesn't survive outside, and it's pretty much confined to being in kennels, puppy mills, and this sort of thing. So these are the key ticks that we see in this part of the country. Next slide. Here in Ohio, just to give you a snapshot of what's been coming into the Ohio Department of Health, you can see, despite the fact that we tell people don't send in American dog ticks, we still got a pretty healthy number sent into ODH. But you can see we're starting to pick up quite a few black-legged ticks now. And there's some other species that we do encounter in the state. But these are the ticks that we generally see here that people are noticing on themselves and on their companion animals. Next slide. So we're going to take a snapshot just of the three main ticks, American dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis. One of the key things with these ticks, despite the fact that they bite a lot of people and a lot of companion animals, at least up in Ohio here, we have less than 2% of those ticks are infected. And so the incidence of Rocky Mountain spotted fever in the state here is relatively low, although this year there's been a tremendous increase in Rocky Mountain spotted fever cases in sort of Tennessee, the Carolinas, almost doubling the number of cases that we normally see, but that didn't occur here in Ohio. Also, that tick's got to be attached for at least a day before transmission occurs. In terms of the feeding of these ticks, larvae and nymphs, hardly ever see them. They feed primarily on rodents. It's the adult stage that we see, and it feeds on medium to large mammals, especially dogs and humans. And it's active anywhere from April, although this year we saw them in March in Ohio, and generally the season here ends in July, although these ticks are still being noticed by people clear into the fall here in Ohio. Next slide. Lone Star tick is a serious pest pretty much in the southeastern United States and is working its way up into Ohio and the upper Midwest. This is a serious pest tick. Can carry ehrlichiosis, southern tick-associated rash illness, or star eye. This tick is no fun because all three life stages after the egg, larva, nymph, and adult will bite people, pets, livestock, really even rodents, or rather lizards, snakes, and birds and the like. It feeds beginning in April and through August. And you can see sort of the family shot here, picture here of these ticks, just to remind me to say that all three life stages are pests. Next slide. And sort of our featured tick today, the black-legged or deer tick, Ixodes scapularis, becoming much more common in the upper Midwest here. And like the Lone Star tick, all three life stages will bite just about any host, and dogs are and humans are affected considerably, especially by the diseases that are listed above there: Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, ehrlichiosis, and babesiosis. And again, I have all the family picture here just to remind me to say that all these life stages will feed sort of universally. Next slide. Just to map to show you the Lyme disease picture here in the United States. You can see on the left-hand side the Lyme disease cases as reported in 2010, around 30,000 confirmed cases, which may be only 10% of the number of cases that actually occur. And over on the right-hand side, you can see the distribution of the black-legged tick. And one thing to note is all the ticks that are in the southeastern United States, but not nearly as many Lyme disease cases. And this probably has to do with the diversity of hosts, and many of those hosts may be not competent reservoirs for Borrelia burgdorferi. But you can see here in Ohio and that we have sort of a tick gap, and for whatever reason we've been spared having this tick in the state until recently. Next slide. And just show you what's been happening here in Ohio. I found the first established population of the black-legged tick in Coshocton County in 2010. And since that time, from surveys of deer and ticks being sent into the Ohio Department of Health, we're now up to at least 26 counties we think the tick is established in, and that'll be red on your screen. And in pink, you can see some ticks have been sent in from other counties. And using the criteria that the CDC uses, if you have 6 or more ticks or 2 life stages, then that county is considered to have likely have an established population of this tick. So you can see the likely distribution of this tick sort of matches what we see as the eastern deciduous forest in Ohio. Next slide. And this is just a closer picture of the deer tick family, showing the size differences and sort of the markings that we'll talk about in more detail. But it's pretty easy to see there are differences between the larva, nymph, and the adult male and female. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Next slide. First, I want to talk about the activity of this tick. And this is what we see sort of in the upper Midwest and the northeastern United States. This is particular data sets from ODH just for Ohio. But a couple of things I want to point out. One is that this tick really is active all 12 months out of the year, even through the winter months. And one of the key features here is the appearance and how long the nymphal stage is active, beginning in the spring and lasting clear through the fall. And this is the stage that most people get Lyme disease from, because it's active when we're outside. It's very small, about the size of a poppy seed, and it only takes 2 to 3 days to feed up. And then you see the larval stage is active soon after that. And this is how Lyme disease is maintained, is that nymphs feed on newly born white-footed mice in the spring. They become infected, and subsequently the larvae become active and feed on those infected white-footed mice. And this is what maintains the Borrelia burgdorferi in the population there, making it a zoonotic disease. And you see right now we're in the middle of an adult peak, and this was verified with our checking deer recently here in Ohio during the deer gun season. The adult ticks were very active. And so hit the next slide. I think there's a picture of a nymph there. Yeah, thanks, Denise. You can see the size of the nymph there right next to my finger, quite small. And the next slide, Denise. And next one, there you go. And you can see the adult quite a bit larger, and just illustrating the fact that this tick is active even in the fall and winter. And this tick was collected around snow piles on leaf litter. All right, next slide. All right, we'll just kind of finish our thought here on Lyme disease transmission. We get a lot of questions about this, and there is no evidence that Lyme disease is transmitted from person to person. It isn't transmitted from pets to people. It doesn't appear to be in the blood supply. The one case in which it can be transmitted from one person to another is in utero, where the developing fetus can become infected with Lyme disease if the mom's not treated with antibiotic. Next slide. All right, a little bit about prevention. Gardeners, folks outside where these ticks are found need to take precautions to keep ticks off of them. And one of the key things is to use repellents and always follow the label directions. But DEET is an excellent repellent. Generally, my experience is you have to have 25 to 30% DEET to be effective for ticks. And this can be applied to clothing or directly on skin. Permethrin is a different kind of repellent. It's actually an acaricide. Should be applied to clothing only, and the clothing should be pre-treated, not sprayed on or applied while the clothes are being worn, and then allow that to air dry. And then that may last up to 6 hot water washings depending on how the product is applied. So this gives you a thorough protection from ticks that generally ascend from vegetation not any higher than knee high. The other key thing is to tuck pants into socks or boots, and this limits access to the outside of the clothing. Next slide. The other key thing is to know when and where these ticks are active. And this slide just illustrates that if you're traveling or a certain part of the country, that during especially the summer months when ticks are active, you can see Lyme disease is in blue, anaplasmosis yellow, spotted fever is red, ehrlichiosis is orange. You can sort of see the high-risk areas where pets and people may be exposed to these tick-borne diseases. So you need to be aware of this when using the outdoors. Next slide. Another key thing is obviously to do tick checks. Doing this on pets and people daily, especially after a walk in a tick habitat, as illustrated there on the right-hand side. Another thing you can do is sample the garden or yard where you may be walking for ticks using a tick drag or a flag. And you can see Terry Simpson here, who I recently visited, was sampling a wooded area where she takes her dogs and cats for a daily walk. And you can know then what the risk might be when walking in those areas. And another thing, when you know you're going to have pets in these tick-infested areas, is to use an anti-tick product. And really there we're asking folks to use the veterinarians to get the best advice, because there are a lot of products out there on the marketplace, on the internet, in stores and the like. So we suggest that you go to your veterinarians to get the best products and how to use them safely. You can also develop a tick-safe zone around the house, keeping the grass mowed, creating a mulch barrier around the edge between the woods and the mowed area, and then applying anti-tick chemicals, or there are some fungi that are being developed as well for control of ticks, especially in wooded habitats. Next slide. There are some myths out there and misunderstandings. One thing is I hear a lot of people calling it Lyme's disease, and it's actually should be Lyme disease, named after the town in Connecticut where the disease was first found. So I have a picture of the city limit sign there to remind you that it's Lyme disease. So as professionals, we always want to call it what it is, Lyme disease, and not Lyme's disease. So I know that sounds trivial, but as professionals, we should be using the right terminology. Next slide. Another thing is that ticks jump from trees. People think because they find ticks on their head that the ticks must be falling or jumping out of trees, and because they never noticed them crawling on their clothing, and now they're on their head. And it's actually the ticks rarely get higher than knee high. So and this is when we're collecting ticks, we just drag the cloth on foliage, on leaf litter, and that's generally where we pick the ticks up. So, and the black-legged tick that would send the picture here actually doesn't even have eyes. So we sort of kid around. Well, how would a tick even time its jump if it can't see? So even ticks with eyes wouldn't be able to visualize or host well enough to time their jump. So that's a myth. Next slide. Probably the biggest one with ticks is how you get a tick off. And I don't have them all listed here, but ones you hear usually are hot match fingernail polish, rubbing alcohol, or even petroleum jelly, trying to suffocate the tick or irritate it to get it to back out. And we did a study back in 1985, published it in Pediatrics, where we tested these folk methods, and we found that none of them worked ever. And even if they did work, they may make tick removal even more difficult. Imagine trying to remove a tick that's covered with petroleum jelly. And of course, the other issue is how long do you wait for a tick to back out, and that may give the pathogen time to be transmitted by the tick. So we really discourage these and really recommend just grabbing the tick with a pair of tweezers or protected fingers, and then pulling with steady, even pressure. And there are various tick tools out there that will accomplish the same thing. They pretty much just give people courage to do the right thing, which was really to pull the tick off. So this is really important to not have people wait around. Really what you need to do is remove the tick as soon as it's discovered and save it. Most people's first inclination is to dispose of the tick, and that can be a key element, especially if symptoms develop, in trying to figure out what disease may have been transmitted by the tick. Next slide. So a little bit about identification. This is really important. It's not that hard to do. There's a paper out there by James Cairns that was published in 1989, and even allows you to identify ticks west of the Mississippi, but emphasizes those east of the Mississippi. And if anyone's interested in having a PDF copy of that, just email me needham.1@osu.edu, and I'll make sure you get a copy of it. Next slide. One of the first things is to identify the stage of tick that you have. And on the left-hand side, you can see different morphological features and porous areas, brachial plates, legs, genital aperture, and scutum. And you can see the life stages there: larvae, nymphs, males, and females. And if you just, the key ones to focus on are the spracular plates. Larvae don't have spracular plates. They get their air exchange directly through the body. They only have 6 legs. You go to the nymphal stage, you see they add a pair of legs. They have spracular plates for respiration. Go to the males, they've got spracular plates, 8 legs. They have a genital aperture, which neither the larvae and nymphs have, and they have a scutum that covers the entire back. Females have the porous areas, brachial plates, 8 legs, genital aperture, and the scutum only covers generally the first half or third of the tick. And this is provided by Rich Robbins at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Next slide. So it's just a picture showing you these key features: the genital aperture there that will be present only in adults, spiracles in nymphs and adults, and then you see the anal groove, and a key feature there is whether that anal groove is in front of the anus or behind the anus, and we'll show that to you in the next couple of slides. Next slide. This is to point out the anal groove. The only genus with a groove in front of the anus is Ixodes, and you can see those. The female on the left-hand side, kind of on her side there, you can see the anal groove real clearly. In the upper part, you can see a line, kind of a faint line that goes in front of the anus for the larval stage. And on the male, you can see the anal groove clearly goes in front of the anus. So regardless of the life stage, it's pretty easy to see, except when specimens are fully engorged. It may be harder to see that feature. Next slide. And this is just the first couplet in the key that I talked about a moment ago, showing you the groove in front of or behind the anus. So next slide. And here's a picture of a tick where it's been cleared on a microscope slide, and it shows the groove behind. Next slide. And there's the larval stage, just showing you the key features. Here you can see it's got 6 legs. Obviously this is going to be a very small tick, very difficult maybe to see, especially if it's attached to a host, but you can see there's no genital aperture, and the anus is clear there. On that one it does have the groove in front of the anus. So this would be the larval stage of Ixodes scapularis. Next slide. Here we've got the nymph. Unfortunately, this is a dorsal view, but you can still see the anus through the cuticle. There's no genital aperture, and what we've done is we've added a pair of legs. Still quite small in size. Next slide. And here of the adult male, you can see the scutum covers the entire back, so these males don't really take much of a blood meal. They attach and mate intermittently on the host. And then you can see the key features on the underside there, which you've already talked about. Next slide. And here we have a sort of a different picture, I guess you'd say a live picture. It's tick crawling on the back of my hand, and you can see the scutum there on the front third of that Dermacentor variabilis female. Next slide. Okay, so you're out in the field, you're out gardening, you're out somewhere, and you've got this tick crawling on you. You using this sort of key, looking for ornamentation, you can see that two of those ticks, A and C, both have ornamentation on the back. The one in the middle, the B Ixodes, they do not have ornamentation. And so it's pretty easy to identify both the genera here and because you know what ticks are found maybe in your area, even what species is present. Next slide. So we got you a little tick quiz here. Look at A there, sort of take a shot at what you think that tick is, and B, also whether it's a male or a female. Same thing with C, and then there's D there. That's a tick that's on its back, so you wouldn't be able to see the scutum there, but the size may give you an indication what tick is present. So next slide, we can see how you did. So the female, the large tick, there's American dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis. B is the male black-legged tick. C is a female black-legged tick. And then the small tick there is a nymphal black-legged tick. All right, next slide. All right, well, this is kind of a summarization of some of the morphology and some of the biology of these ticks, and I just want to use this to kind of briefly review what we've been talking about. First, it's important to identify the tick. Once you know what genus and species it is, then you know what diseases the tick may transmit in your area. So you can see the Dermacentor variabilis male on the left and the female on the right, and this tick generally lives in grassy areas along paths and road edges. And on the lower right, the Lone Star tick, which is moving up into the state of Ohio. It's ornamented, and the male has some white markings on the back, and the female has that distinguished white spot. That's the name Lone Star tick. And these ticks require a little more shade, usually not in open areas. And on the left-hand side, the black-legged or deer tick has no ornamentation, and it's a smaller tick, and it's the one that is active 12 months out of the year, up to 12 months out of the year. And the female sort of has a characteristic orangish reddish back end, especially when it's not engorged. So this is kind of a snapshot that you can use to identify ticks. Now if you get one that doesn't look like this, then it's important to try to get an identification to see if it's just a tick that's not very common, or maybe something that's new to the area. And so we'd ask that you'd send those ticks in to Ohio State University, or if you're in the state of Ohio, send it to the Ohio Department of Health, and we can get that information posted for you so you know where to send them and how to send them in for distribution of diseases, especially on dogs. Tick Encounter is a Rhode Island website and has lots of great pictures and information on ticks that affect people and pets. And you can see my email address. And if you don't have time today to ask a question, you want some follow-up on the summer program, information on sending in ticks, anyway, don't hesitate to email me. And of course, you can see my Tick Suck bumper sticker there. So does Lyme disease. So we're trying to spread the word any way we can to raise awareness of risk from ticks, especially the emergence of black-legged ticks and Lyme disease. All right, I think that's the information I wanted to cover today. I'd like to see if there's some things I'd missed or some questions I can answer.
Great, thanks Glenn, and thanks everyone for your patience with some of our technology glitches this morning. But if you do have questions, you can go ahead and put those into the conversation and questions pod, and Dr. Needham can take a look at those and see what we can do. Mary's asking, do larvae and nymphs have hard shells?
The nymphs will look like a small female tick. The scutum is just the front third or half, so it'll look like a female tick, but quite small, and won't have a genital opening.
Glenn's wondering how they attach.
How they hatch?
How they attach.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they have a really amazing mouth parts that excavate a hole in the skin without usually you knowing it, and then they secrete an attachment cement that's sort of an epoxy-like material, part A with part B, that's mixed in the mouth parts and secreted as a tick attaches, and that serves as a gasket, holds the mouth parts in place, and of course makes it more difficult for them to be removed. And that's another reason for forcibly removing the tick, is that generally you remove the cement. And if you were to have some of those folk methods work, the tick backs out on its own, it will leave that cement behind, which may cause further irritation.
For a copy of the presentation, I will be putting that on, let me put it in the chat pod here, on the BLab website. So it's blab.osu.edu. So if you'll check later on today, I should be able to have a PDF of today's presentation up there so you can download that and take a look at it. Let's see, Janice wondered which kinds of ticks carry babesiosis.
That would be the Ixodes scapularis. Of course, that's a disease that can be really serious, and we're seeing it. The areas where babesiosis is found is spreading. One thing I didn't mention is that some of these Ixodes scapularis ticks can actually be carrying more than one disease, so you can get more than one infection from a tick bite. So we're starting to see people with babesiosis and Lyme disease infections at the same time, which makes diagnosis and treatment more complex for the host.
How do you proceed if the tick breaks apart while extracting from your skin?
Well, I think that's that the main thing is that you have detached the tick that might be infected with a disease. So even if you so-called botch it, break the mouth parts off, the important thing is that you've detached this parasite from the host. And it's really not worth going in there with a needle or anything to try to dig out what's left in the skin. Probably do more damage than good. So the best thing to do is just wash it, warm soap and water, and then if you want, put a triple antibiotic on to keep secondary infection from occurring.
And how do you preserve that tick that you've taken out?
It depends on what you want to do with it. It's okay to freeze the tick or just let it die, become a crispy critter, put it in a container so you've got all of the specimen there, can be identified. And with today's modern technology, those dead ticks can still be examined for the DNA of the different pathogens. So it's not that critical how it's stored, just as long as you can still identify it.
Paula asks how global warming and or climate change affect the recent distribution of ticks.
I think it's pretty significant. Here in Ohio, we definitely are experiencing milder winters. It's been a long time since Lake Erie has frozen over, and so we're definitely seeing a moderation of winter here. Now, whether that's a long-term climate change or that's just a natural cycle, we're not really sure, but it's allowing especially ticks like the Lone Star tick to move up into the state from the south. It's probably allowing the expanded distribution of the American dog tick, and certainly the black-legged tick isn't affected that much by cold temperatures. So I think on a national level, we're just seeing a population explosion of ticks, and therefore I think now and in the future we're going to see more and more evidence of tick-borne diseases, and certainly that's the case with Rocky Mountain spotted fever cases this year, where I think it's at least doubled the number of cases from last year.
Great. Great. Thanks, Glenn. I think a few other people might be typing questions in, but if you would offer a thank you in the chat pod to Glen Needham for today's presentation. I know I learned a lot about trying to identify those very small nymph and larval stages. So, oh, there was a question about chemicals to use in the landscape, Glenn. I don't know if you want to address that quickly.
Yes. We're here in Ohio. We're seeing people finding these ticks now in their backyards, you know, in their wooded properties, and there are some chemicals that you can buy that are registered for use on ticks, and you just make sure that you follow the label directions. Some of them are granular pesticides, some of them are sprayed on with conventional spraying equipment, and there are some fungi that are in the works now, some natural occurring soil fungi that look like may have you know, a role in the future, and so we'll be checking on that more. In fact, I'll be giving a tick management lecture at Purdue next month at their IPM workshop. So there are some things that can be done to reduce tick populations on your properties.
Katie had a question about she said, I see on the map that there are more ticks in western PA, however we camp in western New York. And do you think the differences are due to reporting? And I had a similar observation, Glenn, when you put that national map up. There was a pretty defined line between, I think, Kentucky and Tennessee, where there was nothing on one side of the border, so it must be a reporting issue.
I think that's some of it. A lot of those areas, though, are sparsely populated too, where there just aren't as many people. And so you could say, well, that's part of the same thing, is that just no one's looking, no one's reporting them. We see a similar line between Ohio and Pennsylvania, where it looks like the ticks are all on the Pennsylvania side. And as I survey eastern Ohio, I'm beginning to pick up ticks now along the state line with Pennsylvania. But I think there may be some biological things going on there too, either things that are missing that aren't allowing the ticks to expand into these other areas, or there may be something that's preventing the expansion into these other areas.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Thanks, everyone, for joining in today. And as I said, on our B-Lab website under workshops and webinars, I will post the PDF handout from today's program. And I would also encourage you to join our entomology list, our email list. You can do that from blab.osu.edu. That way you'll get notice anytime we have a webinar or upcoming workshop. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.